The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge, what must be done, must be done. Ryan Luis Rodriguez presiding. Your eyes for the Honorable Judge Rodriguez.
Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of the People versus Game of Death, a 1978 martial arts action flick that follows movie star Billy Lowe as he takes on an evil syndicate, one fight at a time. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always in this courtroom, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Matt Pruitt, you are representing the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case about legacy, specifically about the despoiling of a brilliant man's legacy and the exploitation of his final efforts, his final works. The case that I'm going to present to you today will show you that this brilliant young man who accomplished so much in such a short lifetime had a vision that unfortunately he didn't live long enough to see, but that, a number of very short-sighted, greedy, lowly, not only Hollywood, but Hong Kong film executives exploited for their own gains in a laughable and in many ways disgusting manner. And that is the case that I would like to present to you today.
Thank you, Mr. Pruitt. Appearing on behalf of the defense is Mr. Big Ben Haslar. Please present your opening statement.
Members of the jury, but especially the jury at home, who may not have seen Game of Death quite so recently, I want to try an experiment. Close your eyes and picture Bruce Lee. Now picture him again in a different setting. I'm willing to bet that one of the two images that came to your mind was him in that iconic yellow tracksuit from Game of Death, and the other probably him shirtless or something. Game of Death is a flawed movie. We on the defense team are not going to argue otherwise. There is a lot riding against it, especially in an era where we can watch all the Bruce Lee films together in an amazing Criterion box set and coming off the high, the cinematic high that is Enter the Dragon. But to be able to honestly judge this film and cast an honest verdict upon it, we must factor in that at the time, people hadn't seen the original footage Bruce Lee shot for his version of Game of Death. Footage that needed to be seen. Him in that yellow tracksuit, battling his way up a series of floors in fights that exemplify his own Jeet Kune Do fighting style. Nowadays, it can be a bit easier to kind of find this footage, be it in a documentary or re-edited as Game of Death Redux. But at the time, in 1978, there was no great way to utilize the cinematic footage. And even when editing Game of Death Redux, they found that they needed that fantastic score provided by John Barry, that dun 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 dun. So having this footage and knowing that people wouldn't buy a film that tried to complete Bruce Lee's original idea, with Bruce Lee like missing or doubled like through the first half of the story, and then battling up this series of pagodas, this series of floors of the pagoda representing the trials of Hercules, it would be weird to like have one guy and then suddenly it's Bruce Lee. So certain choices had to be made to kind of change the direction that the film went. With Bruceploitation films that erupted after the actor's death, there were a number of techniques of doubles, costuming, shadows. Like one of my favorite shots in this film where Billy Lowe, the Bruce Lee character, is separated from his girlfriend by a gate, and there's these tricks they use to use shadows to make him. It's very eerie and cool. We can debate the merit of Bruceploitation as a genre and how fascinating it is that we couldn't let him go. Enter the Dragon, whatever Bruce films they are, it kind of lends it some legitimacy here. Is every choice flawless? No, of course not. But with everything stacked up against this, you have to admire that they were able to make it as good as they did. This iconic footage is proof positive that you owe this film a debt. It preserves Bruce's legacy, imperfectly perhaps, but nonetheless meaningful. So let us play our own Game of Death.
Hey.
Thank you, Mr. Haslar, and I'd like to point out that footage by its very nature is cinematic. Mr. Pruitt, you may proceed with your
that's not
first
true.
exhibit.
Objection, Your Honor. I'm going to take this trial in a different direction.
You can't object to the judge.
Mr. Pruitt.
Where to begin to address that? I mean, there's so many places we could go. What I would say is that, the people who were handed this project to pick up where the defense left off, like, it is very true that Bruce Lee had filmed a number of scenes, 3 fight scenes in particular, before his passing. He shot this stuff in late 72 from the summer to the early fall, and then was offered, finally, after years of toiling, offered a Hollywood starring role when Warner Brothers agreed to make this motion picture called Enter the Dragon. So Game of Death was put on hold. There weren't a whole lot of directors, unfortunately, who would touch Enter the Dragon at that time because the budget was very, very small. And the director that was selected was a guy named Robert Klaus. And Klaus's only real screen success was Enter the Dragon. Any sort of reading, whether it's of Klaus's own words or from other people involved in the production of Enter the Dragon, sort of reveal that Klaus was a bit difficult, to say the least, and perhaps a bit resentful of Bruce Lee during that time, perceived him as being difficult because he didn't see the vision that Bruce had for Enter the Dragon. Bruce was already a huge star in Asia at that point. Bruce obviously knew the Asian market and knew what Asian audiences were responding to. And, Bruce's difficulty, you could say, was primarily on pushing back on a script written for an Asian market by non-Asians and a film pushed for an international market directed by the less than experienced or less than hyper talented, I would say, Robert Klaus. So after Bruce dies and this footage is sitting in vaults, who's selected to take on this role? Well, unfortunately, it was Robert Klaus. Klaus reviews the fight footage and said in multiple places in interviews that he was extremely unhappy with the choices that Bruce made and with the footage that Bruce left behind. So obviously, I don't think this is the right guy to have directed this film, as I will try to make the case to you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. So to dive into Billy Lowe,
if I may respond just a bit, I think he may disagree. I mean, it probably was no easy challenge to sort of stitch the two films together, and that's probably where most of his objections come from. But I'm willing to bet that most of the negativity that you see for Robert Klaus comes from Robert Wall, who played Carl Miller in this film, who is also known to be terribly hard to work with, very opinionated, very direct. And his footage, his interviews, sort of dominate the supplemental materials you might find when you're looking at Game of Death.
Well, Klaus's clashes with Bruce Lee happened when Bruce was alive, when they were making Enter the Dragon. And
that's true.
Klaus felt that Bruce was being difficult about certain plot points in the script. And I know this is not the film we're debating, so I won't get too deeply into those things. But, Klaus was more than a bit cynical about Bruce Lee and his success. And in fact, was quoted upon watching the hyper successful Bruce Lee films that had been super successful internationally, which prompted Warner Brothers to make the deal and to make a Hollywood co-production with Bruce Lee. Klaus in a screening room said, "We got to knock the swagger out from under this guy. Mm-hmm. We have to change everything about him," which is, as someone who had a background in the entertainment industry, you see that all too often, that when people are successful, some genius in a high level position decides we should wipe out the things that people love about this person that make them successful and see what happens.
Disagreements, I mean, they're going to happen on these sorts of productions. But I think it's sort of a damned if you do, damned if you don't, because you do get that taste of Enter the Dragon from having not just Robert Klaus, but I think there's 3 main directors and producers involved here to make it, to lend it that legitimacy that you wouldn't get from a lot of the Bruceploitation films that were kind of circling around at the time. So I think it kind of helps to go from Enter the Dragon to this rather than Enter the Dragon to something by an entirely different team.
I don't know.
Let
I
us
think
not
Klaus.
forget Jim Cotta.
Jim Cotta.
I think that what Klaus did, I think the laziness and the contempt is sort of laid bare on the page, so to speak, with the dialogue. If you'll notice in the opening credits, which, by the way, they're beautiful opening credits with that beautiful score with this bizarre
Thank
casino
you.
theme, which
Thank
never,
you.
the casino theme never comes to fruition in any way, shape, or form whatsoever in the plot. Which
It's the 70s. I don't know. It feels like very much like a James Bond kind of opening to me.
Well, I think the laziness was that it's the word game is in the title, so they're going to go for this casino thing, and then B, the original vision for Game of Death included George Lazenby, who had just played James Bond, and in fact, Lazenby was in talks to film for Game of Death and was in Hong Kong and had met with Bruce the day before and the day that he passed away. And so it seems like this Bond idea was a holdover, and they carried that into the creation of the opening credits and then incorporated none of it anywhere else. But in terms of the crafting of the character, Billy Lowe, who I think we should just call Billy Lowe Hanging Fruit. I mean, everything that Klaus, which by the way, if you've seen those opening credits, it says written for the screen, screenplay by Jan Spears. Jan Spears is Robert Klaus. I don't know why he used a pseudonym. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was regret.
This guy is clearly Santa.
Shame? Did I not mention Jim Cotta yet?
Jim Cotta.
During Bruce's life, some of the things that the tabloids had attributed to him that a lot of people associate being posthumous actually were happening during his lifetime. So even before he started making the Hong Kong films that made him an international superstar, after the success of The Green Hornet, when he would return home to Hong Kong, they were re-showing The Green Hornet for Hong Kong audiences and calling it the Kato Show, making Bruce's sort of sidekick character the primary focal point because he was essentially a local boy who did well in the States. And so tabloids would often run these stories that, we hate to break the news to you, but Bruce Lee was recently assassinated by, a gang of martial artists or the triads, the sort of Chinese mafia, et cetera. And then in the aftermath of his death, those rumors only exploded because his death was so mysterious at that time. It wasn't really resolved. It still isn't completely resolved, but only a few years ago, I think, did the real cause of death ultimately become revealed to the public. But so it was like Klaus built this character, Billy Lowe, who's a martial arts superstar who's being pursued by essentially the mafia, not quite the triads, but in that film, they just refer to them as the syndicate, who are trying to get a piece of the action and threatening to take his life. So again,
which is completely accurate, by the way. Like Frank Sinatra had ties to the mob, so this sort of thing happens.
Whoa.
It is, but it's completely pulled from it's like we need to write a movie about this. We need to create a character associated with this guy who just died. Let's just pull the entire plot from the Chinese, what they would call the mosquito press, the tabloids. That's where all of that information essentially comes from, the entire plot point, which is, I think, again, terribly lazy. Not to mention the execution. I mean, to sell an audience through, a massive marketing campaign, if you've ever seen the old posters, the Bruce is back, and that, you're going to see all of this never before seen footage, and he's brought back to life on the screen, selling this idea, and then over and over again to not only blatantly show the audience someone who is very clearly not Bruce Lee, but then to intercut with stock footage, which is bad enough, but some of the visual effects are so horribly laughable. Even in the very first 5 minutes,
I know you're going to say it. I know which one you're going to say.
Does it involve a mirror by any chance?
It may.
There's a mishmash. So it goes from pulling scenes from Way of the Dragon with the fight scene from Chuck Norris to pulling in other stock footage of that film, of every time, the character turns his head and then it cuts to Bruce Lee turning and looking in a certain direction. And then when he enters his dressing room with the towel over his shoulders, suddenly there's a clip from Enter the Dragon with like a green screen, sort of like chroma key towel put over the Enter the Dragon frames with a voiceover, and then a cardboard cutout Bruce Lee head pasted to the mirror.
That's my favorite. That one gives me so much joy. Like that they thought that would work. But you know, like I think they thought it might work like on lower definition. You're right. Like we're watching this in high definition, so I think some of it doesn't necessarily play for our modern 4K TVs.
Oh no, I saw this on DVD and it does not look well either. There
does it not? Okay, but still, the challenge is there. I mean, like you're almost arguing like don't make a film. Like, but assuming you're going to make a film, like I'm kind of impressed having seen like Way of the Dragon and some of those recently with it. It's kind of like you can see the way they edit it and the choices they make and how they grab footage from different things. I think it's pretty impressive. I couldn't do it. I couldn't make anything nearly as believable with what they had to work with.
Oh, that is the standard.
I don't know that I'd call it believable. I almost wonder if, I think there's a charitable way that you could look at it, which is I think the case that you're trying to make is that, you know, an earnest filmmaker with, you know, meager tools at hand to make a film from did his best effort. I think the cynical position, or the one that, you know, I would try to put forth is like, here's somebody who had an opportunity to squeeze a little bit more money out of this person that essentially put him on the map as a filmmaker.
Maybe. I mean, that is cynical, but without it, you do not get that pagoda fight that we all know, that yellow tracksuit that we all know. And this is footage that we needed to see.
Actually, there's a great deal of that had already been released at that point.
Not quite. No. There were like magazine footages or magazine pictures that people saw. So they kind of had an idea of what it was going to be, but nobody saw it in like cinematic form.
There was the very first documentary made about the life and times of Bruce Lee by Golden Harvest that included all of this footage that they filmed in the immediate aftermath of Bruce's death, of them. Golden Harvest employees cleaning out Bruce's office, cleaning out his home. And this is literally like on July 21st, July 22nd, after Bruce had passed on July 20th. So you see like the half-eaten meal on a plate still on the desk in his house, and filming his Hong Kong funeral, filming his family going to the airport, being flown to the United States, footage of them in Seattle, footage of the Seattle funeral and the burial. And then I think that documentary was completed and released within a month or so of Bruce's death. And that did include a lot of the dailies and the rushes of Game of Death. So people had seen segments of that. And then a lot more of that was incorporated, especially a lot of the outtakes, in a subsequent edit of that same documentary that was released, I think around, it might have been right after Game of Death. It might have been released in 1980. But some of that footage was available and had been released by Golden Harvest. But I think
maybe. Maybe. I don't think the common person had seen it. Like maybe like diehard Bruce fans may have found some way to have seen it at that time. But, you know, we didn't have the internet, so we couldn't download these documentaries or whatever. It's like if you didn't see something on TV live or in theater live, you missed it. So I don't quite buy that.
We're not supposed to download them now, Ben.
I would also ask, you know, if Klaus was genuinely caring for this person's legacy, can you think of another film which depicts its actual star's actual corpse on camera?
That is in bad taste. I will give you that. I think that the only defense I can proffer for that is like they were a little too close to it. They were just like trying to grab any kind of footage they can, so they didn't like take that step back to think like, would people find this a bit distasteful? Like really, like they had so little footage to work with that hadn't already been aired in one of the movies that they're just like kind of scrounging up whatever they could. So yeah, I think in hindsight, it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback and say, yeah, that was probably not the best choice they could have made. But, you know, I don't think there was malice behind it. I think they were just like, this is footage we have. Can we use it?
I think it's a blatant cash grab. I think it's about using every asset at hand that will hold people's attention and get people talking, and to write a script wherein, you know, the tabloid version of a real person's death is made into the plot point of a film, such that then, you know, you have to show the faking of that death and sort of, you remember the dialogue like, oh, we better make sure it's a big public funeral and an open casket so that they'll, you know, we'll get the syndicate off of his trail. And then to show that footage and have Colleen Camp basically acting as the stand-in for the real Linda Lee, sobbing and crying. If you've ever actually seen the real funeral footage, and then to show the footage of them wheeling out the casket, opening it, and then the camera panning down onto, you know, Bruce's dead body. Those are pretty strange decisions for someone who's doing anything other than what I would say is just absolute exploitation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I'll grant you that that I would have made different choices, but you have to like put yourself in the time. Like people were so surprised, like if we didn't know like the actual cause of Bruce's death, you know, like a lot of people like this guy was so strong, he was so invincible. How could anything take this guy out? So I think it kind of makes sense to put that in the narrative. I wouldn't have shown the footage that they showed. I'm okay with him faking his death though, because that very much is kind of a part of the Bruce mindset of the time. Like, how could anything take this guy out?
I just found it kind of shocking. Now that footage again it had been available in the earlier Golden Harvest documentary, but it's very strange to see woven into the plot point of that movie. And especially when you think from the standpoint of, you know, there's many photos of one of the United States premieres. It was probably the Los Angeles premiere, and Bruce's mother and his younger brother, Robert, and Linda and the two children are there at the premiere. And you have to wonder, like, did they see any screenings of this? Did they know what you know, Warner Brothers and Golden Harvest had done to this plot? Or were they sort of sitting in the theater watching this play out and then had to relive that day and see their, you know, son, brother, husband, father's corpse on camera in a movie theater full of people? I suspect it was that. I doubt that they were heavily involved in, you know, the shaping the direction, the artistic direction of that film. I think.
Yeah, I had heard his mother in particular was kind of like surprised and shocked by that. But I don't know. It's public footage. Like they were allowed to use it, as distasteful as it might be.
Now, the edit of the pagoda scenes, I will give them credit for. It's a nice, tight edit. You know, they used about 11 minutes of it, which there's a tremendous amount more. But, you know, the original footage also involves two other characters, which they do show some of in one of the flashback scenes of James Tien, who arrives at Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's floor first and is dispatched by Kareem. So they use a bit of that. But, you know, once you realize that the other footage, the full footage exists, it was funny rewatching it today. I'd forgotten, like in some of the scenes, like the second scene with Jihan Jae, you do see one of the dead characters on the floor in the background. But as, you know, a younger person, I never noticed that because I
didn't notice it either, even when I saw it the first time. But yeah, like once you see the footage, you're like, wow, isn't it amazing how they edited around those two whole other characters that were in this segment?
I think the cynical part of me, though, thinks that, you know, there was just some element somewhere, you know, maybe just a general sentiment among certain cash grab movie makers, maybe not initially Klaus, Golden Harvest, and Warner Brothers, but in the aftermath of Bruce's death, like you would reference the Bruceploitation films, of which there were many, you know, there an egregious number of them. And there likely were people around the world who had only caught glimpses of Bruce Lee, whether in magazines or publications, or, you know, bits and pieces of things. And so they genuinely didn't know the difference. And some of those films were internationally successful. You know, none of them were like United States box office hits, but they played well at like independent theaters and other places in other markets. And so I think there was this sentiment like, hey man, people are too dumb to know the difference and they don't care anyway. And after enough years of that working, it seems like Robert Klaus, folks at Warner Brothers, and maybe Raymond Chow said, well, yeah, that does seem to be the case. People are too dumb to know the difference and they won't care anyway. So, because if you notice, there's
one of them is like one of Quentin Tarantino's favorite movies, right? Soul Brothers of Kung Fu.
Well, what's really strange is, you know, I know that the film, there's no way that film was shot chronologically, but it does play out in this weird chronological way. Like they just start, you know, they try less and less as the film progresses to hide the faces of the doubles. You know, there's more than one double. There's, you know, one particular actor who does all the action scenes and one who does all the sort of quiet dialogue scenes, even though they dub the voice. And they just hide their faces less and less and less.
Well, they kind of allow themselves to, right, with that facial injury where he gets shot. So like they can kind of get away more with like the sunglasses and things of that nature, at least in their own minds.
And the injury is completely gone by the time he appears in the pagoda. And rewatch, like continuity did not matter at all to these people.
It's like a week later. Like I think they do get a little bit more careful about that, like leading up to like he got better. Like leading up to the fight, like he's got the bike helmet and stuff. You know, like they do like sort of dial it back all of a sudden. So
yeah, he's fighting Stick in the rain and is completely soaking wet, and then runs into the restaurant and is bone dry when he shows up. Things of that nature. And I also thought the dubbing, the whoever dubbed, and the person is known. I've read the person's name. I think it was like a friend of a student. It's some sort of third party association with Bruce Lee. The person who dubbed the quote unquote war cries that sound like a parody. They don't even sound like an attempt to be intense or dramatic or animalistic. It sounds like a Saturday Night Live sketch, like impersonation of Bruce Lee.
Anything sounds bad if you say it's like a Saturday Night Live sketch. Come on.
But it's
it's
so laughable that it's like that really takes away, I think, from a lot of the action scenes, and especially that 11 minutes. It's like the complete overdoing of the battle cries.
Oh, so they were dubbed even in the scenes. Sorry, can I ask a question from the jury? I'm curious about that.
It's very unusual, but
it is. I didn't know that in the scenes like where he was alive.
I hadn't heard that either.
They had also dubbed those sounds in.
All of those Hong Kong films were shot without sound because Hong Kong was a very noisy place, and so they would film at all times of day and night, and there could be a tremendous amount of traffic or airplanes.
That can't be true. No, like in the Redux, we have Bruce's live voice. He's like
in the Redux. Depending on which, so in John Little's version of his recut of the Game of Death, that's John Little doing Bruce Lee's voice. All this stuff about like
really,
yes,
wow, good job, man.
Bruce never recorded any ADR for any of that stuff. What's really interesting is, so those films were made for a Mandarin market, all of them. So they were all shot without sound, and Bruce didn't speak Mandarin. He only spoke Cantonese and English. So he would speak Cantonese lines that had a sort of sound-alike phonic quality. And those would all be overdubbed, but he would overdub his own screams and battle cries. So the screams and stuff, especially in Fist of Fury, Way of the Dragon, and Enter the Dragon, are all Bruce Lee's voice. What's really funny is if you watch the English dubs, for whatever reason, it's all English actors, English speakers, because at that time Hong Kong was still a British colony. So all of the voices are English speakers doing every single voice. If you watch the Mandarin or Cantonese dubs of those films, any English speaker is Bruce Lee's voice because he was like the only guy around who could speak English. So there's these great scenes in Fist of Fury where he's facing off against a guy who was a student of his from Oakland, or from Stockton rather, a guy named Bob Baker, who plays the Russian bad guy in Fist of Fury. If you watch the Cantonese dub, it's all Bruce Lee doing his voice. He's, let me take care of him. And so it's Bruce Lee trying to do a Russian accent, which is quite funny.
Let's put that one on the docket, please.
They can't do a Barbados show quartet or anything because they all have the same voice.
So if you watch any of those like recuts, like John Little's A Warrior's Journey or Alan Canvan's Game of Death Redux, they pull the war cries from other Bruce films. So like the fight sounds are Bruce Lee's voice, but the dialogue is someone else impersonating it. And even in Enter the Dragon, there was a scene that was removed in the beginning of the film where Bruce's character is walking with the Shaolin, with the abbot, and they have this brief discussion about, the highest technique is to have no technique, etc. Several documentaries use that dialogue, and it is Bruce Lee's voice. But for some reason, when Warner Brothers reissued it, they got John Little to do his impersonation of Bruce Lee's voice. And so it's really strange to hear this Canadian dude trying to do like an Asian American accent. It's very bizarre. So in the footage, like in the pagoda, like I bought it more than I thought. I didn't even know that wasn't Bruce Lee's voice, even in the Redux. So I don't know. I like, if they had no sound to work with, you can say like, okay, they didn't quite nail it, but of course they wouldn't. They didn't have Bruce Lee's voice to work with. So what do you want? Unfortunately, no. But I do think when you hear other versions of that cut that use the ADR from those previous films, which obviously they got from Golden Harvest and or Warner Brothers, if we're talking about Enter the Dragon. So they would have had access to all of those sound bites and sound effects. But for some reason in the 78 Game of Death, they hired some, and I'm pretty sure it was like a white American dude. I'm struggling to remember his name, but
I don't remember his name, but you're not wrong.
Yeah, but he's the guy doing all that.
Dylan Schlender.
Hey.
Well, okay, you got me.
I can only imagine, I think if that film had come out today, it would have played very differently, because you can imagine at a time prior to the internet when you could just pump up a whole lot of hype, and this sort of like simultaneously premieres around the world, and you get like one or two good weekends out of it before the word spreads that like, hey, man, like Bruce Lee is barely in this movie. It doesn't make any sense. This is all bizarre. You do get 11 minutes at the end, but that's about it. And I think that's essentially how it played out. I don't think it was a big box office performer, not only in the States, but in all the international markets where the previous Bruce Lee films did exceedingly well and broke all those records. So I do think for that reason, I think if we were to look at those numbers, we could infer that even the audience could see, like, yeah, this is a cash grab. This isn't something you go back and see multiple times like people did with those earlier films.
Well, we don't judge box office success as merit of a good movie here in this court, but I would also expect it not to perform as well, given that Bruce is only in it for 11 minutes. So given that it performed well at all, that's something.
I just think that the original vision that he had would have been, first of all, it would have been very trippy and of its day, like this weird sort of like semi-psychedelic philosophical early 70s sort of a thing. I do not expect some, deep-pocketed movie company to have said, oh, yeah, that's the film we're going to make. I understand why they would make something a little bit more straightforward. But I do think, to not be able to see the legacy that is being preserved, or at least should be attempted to be preserved, and to say like, hey, we have to throw something together. Let's just pull every headline from every tabloid and take all the rumors and mishmash them into this plot, and use whatever trickery we have to use to get to these 11 minutes and make it work. And again, the sense that I get from the filmmakers is that, hey man, people are either too stupid or they just won't care, because all they're here for is that 11 minutes. So we don't really have to put too much time or energy into or love into the rest of this.
I don't think they were there for the 11 minutes. I think they came to realize that they only had 11 minutes, but they got the stock footage like sort of peppered around it. So they were like looking for a Bruce Lee film, and like they gave you as much Bruce Lee as they could.
I guess we'll have to disagree on that, because I do think all the other treatments that people have made are so much more exciting and compelling. And, and some of these are just like people in their basements, essentially having like ripped the footage and the outtakes from various other films. And like, that's essentially what Alan Canvaden did with Game of Death Redux. He didn't have a budget or a studio or anything of that nature. So that just tells me like, well, if Joe Schmo, who really actually cares about the subject and the subject of the film, the legacy of Bruce Lee, and wants to see that vision brought to fruition to some degree, can do it with no resources, then you have to wonder like, well, how did Golden Harvest and Warner Brothers and Robert Klaus fail to do so epically in a way that there's a reason that people often say like, this is one of the worst films ever made.
And that version is on the Blu-ray Criterion box set. Bruce Lee's Greatest Hits.
It is, and I think there's supposed to be a Game of Death Redux 2.0 or 3.0. There's a lot of life that people are still trying to wring every last drop out of that stuff.
It's true. So you can't blame this movie for trying to as well, right? Like people needed more Bruce Lee. We didn't get the closure we needed. So this gives it to us.
I don't blame
it. Even in those ending credits, right? Like the ending credits are like a tribute to like Bruce's whole legacy. So it kind of gives us like that sort of swan song,
I don't blame them for trying to wring every last drop, or even monetarily, because obviously that's the job of these film studios. I mean, truthfully, Raymond Chow had already sold the rights to Game of Death to, I think, Japanese distributors. And so even after Bruce died, it was kind of like, hey, well, we know you have this footage and you owe us. We already paid for this. So that was a big part of the impetus of like, hey, we have to put something out because I'm contractually obligated to at least this one major market to release something. So I certainly I don't fault them for that. I just think that when you see what other people with little to no Hollywood filmmaking experience and little to no money, resources, crews did with it, then you think like, well, how
to no experience, but like 30 plus years later, that he's got technology that these people didn't have.
I will concede that point. That is a good point. But Klaus obviously had experience and resources, Warner Brothers, Golden Harvest, etc. They had access to all of the footage and everything, not just at least what those guys had to deal with was what they could get their hands on, what had been released. Whereas, all this stuff was still sitting in Golden Harvest's archives at that time. So he had everything at his fingertips to choose from. And he chose that, that short 11-minute version. Now that I've seen the other versions so often, when I rewatched the film today, I was like, oh man, this is really short. Those 3 fight scenes as a kid, I remember thinking it was like half an hour long. You finally get to that payoff. Like
it's like all fighting right at the end. Like what a climax! Just like, ooh, more fighting. It's all great.
It is, and that's sort of what we're all there for. Like as fans, that's the moment in a lot of those films you're always waiting for. Is like, yeah, let's get through the exposition and the dialogue so we can get to some cool stuff. But I just think it's just a sad thing. As a huge fan, it would break my heart if someone saw that film first. Like if someone were going to say, hey man, I know you're into Bruce Lee. I'm going to go watch Game of Death. I'd be like, well, hey, can I give you like an hour-long dissertation first so you know what level of hell you're about to descend into? Because there might be...
You and Ryan would get along great.
Because there might be someone out there who is that person that doesn't know the difference. And I know that's the case because people send me, because I do all this other stuff that's public facing, about a totally unrelated subject, but I'll talk about my interests. And so people hear that I'm a huge fan. And so they'll send me clips that are either from Bruceploitation films or the big viral 2008 Nokia video that they made, the black and white of the guy in the Bruce Lee in the Game of Death jumpsuit playing ping pong.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, it was a big viral video, like as a part of a viral marketing campaign that Nokia did. And so it's supposed to be this found footage. It's like black and white, 8mm looking footage of this Bruce Lee character playing ping pong with nunchucks against a ping pong player. And people, ever since that came out, send it to me. And I always have to say, hey, that's not Bruce Lee. Or some clip from Exploitation. Now it's all AI because there's a zillion AI videos. And I have to be like, hey, that's not Bruce Lee. And then people will sort of argue. So I'll be like, you can't see that that's like a different human being's face. Like,
so isn't that like much more preferable than this movie? Like this movie, like at least has real Bruce Lee footage. Like if we're in a world of AI, like generating like Bruce Lee films, like I'll take the real, like the 11 minutes you can give me.
But see, I think it's the same thing. It's an attempt to trick people into, seeing something that is not the person that it's purported to be and hoping to get away with it to some degree, at least for as long as they could, in the span of, it's not a very long movie, but at least until the very end when they use that 11 minutes and trying to use some trickery with, again, stock footage or the cardboard cutout, etc. But I see them as shades of the same thing. And that's why it would...
you peek too close. You peek too close at the curtain. You're trying to pick apart the seams. Like when you're just watching the movie the first time, that's not really what your experience is.
Yeah, but it would hurt my heart if someone walked away going like, man, I don't know why people love that Bruce Lee guy. I saw this movie and it was terrible, because you do see this marked difference. For example, in the fight scenes, like the Bruce Lee action double is like slow as molasses compared to the real thing. And the scenes are kind of weird.
Of course, he's not Bruce Lee.
And, Klaus really couldn't shoot that stuff. I mean, Bruce was the fight coordinator on Enter the Dragon, but he was also behind the camera and setting up the shots. And, the fight scenes that you see in those films, like Bruce was pretty much directly responsible for, including as like director of photography, etc. So you do see, like, not only did he know how to do stuff on camera, but he knew how to make those things appeal on screen and have a sort of realism that Klaus, he wasn't an action director. He couldn't shoot fight scenes in that same way. So if someone were to watch that film and go, man, like, I thought Bruce Lee was all that and all these other scenes just weren't any good, and have to explain, like, no, that actually is not Bruce Lee. I know it says it is.
I'm not sure I agree. I mean, like Robert Wall has like 2 great fights, like one in that locker room. None of these are like really easy to perform. There's like big WWE energy going on in that with these like heavy strikes and throws out of the arena. That's right. That's one for you. Vote for me. Damn you. And that leads to that locker room fight, which does reuse like some bit of stock footage and a double. But it's got that great line of "You lose, Carl Miller." Like the motorcycles are great, utilizing those tracksuits. I don't think like this is badly directed, and I think it's kind of interesting how they realized how iconic that tracksuit was going to be with like the little footage that they had. It's been reused in Kill Bill and just about everywhere. So there's great stunts in there, like the kick to the head off the bike. It's easy to like focus on just the pagoda fights, but like a lot of this is really passable as a 70s martial arts film if you weren't just like so married to like where's the seam at?
Yeah, I mean the suit being iconic, I would credit all that to obviously Bruce Lee making those decisions, but the fact that you got to see some of that footage in that very first documentary released right after his death, and then all the stills, many of the Bruceploitation films that came out prior to Game of Death were all oriented on that look. And there would be these, because it was known that he was in the midst of making a film that he was going to call Game of Death, and he was talking about it pretty openly in the press. So people knew the title and they knew sort of the gist of like certain elements of the story. So a lot of the Bruceploitation films were attempts to make Game of Death, and it would be like Enter the Game of Death, or Bruce's final Game of Death, or The Last Game of Death, and on and on and on. And they would all have that tracksuit or some variation of it, the closest thing they could find on a rack or a shelf or something like that. So I do think that was another big part of it. It's like it had already become sort of iconic on its own, those being those sort of like mysterious final images of Bruce's mysterious unfinished film. So Klaus, I think, had a lot of tools at hand. I just don't think that what he did with those tools was what, he could have done given the time, energy, and resources that they had. And especially, everything they had access to at Golden Harvest. Like, I think the dialogue is so terrible. A lot of it didn't even make sense rewatching it. Like, there's the scene when Colleen Camp's character flees the funeral, and the journalist is like, "Hey, come on, pull yourself together." And she's like, "Don't you understand anything? People look, but they don't see." It's like, what? Huh? What does that mean? And a lot of the dialogue was that
I
way.
feel like that's like the case with a lot of Bond movies at the time too. It was just the 70s, man. It wasn't a good era for fashion. It wasn't a good era for dubbing.
What?
It's a bizarre, it's a sort of like theater of the absurd. And I think quite literally, like the most metaphorically accurate scene is where they open up Billy Lowe's grave and smashes his clay face in. I was like, yeah, that's
that awesome cane sword thing. Like, that thing's pretty sweet though, right?
That's kind of a good metaphor for this whole film. As a kid, I was so grateful to see those scenes, obviously. But like I said, as an adult, I would just be, if someone said, I'm going to watch one, where should I start? I'd be like, for the love of God, whatever you do, do not start there.
Well, you should start there because it can only go up, right? It's like...
Okay, we are running out of time, Mr. Pruitt. Have you any further exhibits?
I think I'll just rest my case there.
Very well. Well, I do have one extra exhibit beyond what we've already talked about. I think that this iconic pagoda footage outweighs whatever other perceived flaws there are. You should have heard that a lot in my case already. But if you see what they've had to work with, it's really impressive what they were able to do with very minimal continuity errors. In the original footage, Bruce is accompanied by two other people they could only get one of to finish this film. And as such, they made it so Bruce's character sort of has to fight alone, because otherwise where did these two guys go? The nunchuck fight is great. I think that nunchucks are only popular because of this. And honestly, I can't think of many other times in film where they work. And Bruce shows a lot of personality here, like his licking the base of the chuck. And, there's that Jeet Kune Do in there where the dude thinks that this is a nunchuck fight. And then all of a sudden, bam, a long kick right out of nowhere. It shows how like the flexible bamboo beats the cane, that heavy staff. This is all very Bruce Lee. Then we get higher and see him fight against Aikido, a completely different style with a lot of grapples and throws. And then there's that Kareem fight, which is the best of all because of that massive height difference between the two. And this is really the beginning of MMA or mixed martial arts. We see adaptation, the having to find ways to close the gap to make the height a disadvantage to him. It might also be a precursor to the platforming structure in video games. And I love that footprint that's like on his chest the whole time from like that very first kick. I think I've seen footage here and there from Redux, but it's all so engaging. So many things to focus on about how he's like turning fighting into actual strategy. It also highlights how good of a filmmaker Bruce is, because in addition to being a fighter, as we've mentioned, he shot all of this. So he gave this new crew all of the angles they needed to stitch it together into the final film. And on that, the defense will rest.
All right. All sides rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Mr. Pruitt, you may begin.
I would just say that everything that you just highlighted as a positive about this film, I would agree with, but we're talking about the 3 fight scenes that Bruce Lee filmed and his vision, because he was an innovator and he was an artist. I'm not certain how many people in today's world realize how much of what they see in any sort of like filmed combat comes directly from what Bruce Lee created and started. And when Bruce first emerged on camera doing martial arts in the 1960s in the Green Hornet in 1966, he had a way and an approach that was so antithetical to the way that, fist fights or any sort of like unarmed combat was filmed on whether television or in motion pictures. And there were a lot of arguments and a lot of debates about like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, but he knew exactly what he was doing. And he eventually won people over and sort of got his way. And, it influenced a lot of people around him. And then other people thought, oh, well, he's a bit of a difficult person. But I think history has shown that he was right. When he went back to Hong Kong, he faced the same problem, but from a different angle. And that if you look at any of the kung fu flicks prior to Bruce Lee, there were martial arts movies. Most of them were period pieces, costume dramas with a lot of sword fighting and wire work. And he had a vision for like, no, this is how it should be done. This is how it should be executed. This is the way we should stage these cameras, etc. This is the way that, I should dispatch this number of people, and this will increase from fight to fight until leading up to the boss of, a given scene or a given level or of the whole film, etc. So most of what people see, whether you're watching The Matrix or, any of the Bourne films, or the list goes on, is all derived from Bruce Lee. Like he's the sort of the prototype. He is a sort of archetype. I mean, films today, you would see characters like, the grizzled old detective or, the sort of renegade cowboy. And you have like the sort of wise, quiet, deadly martial arts master. That character did not exist prior to Bruce Lee. That's the legacy that I'm talking about. And that is what you see portrayed so beautifully in those 3 scenes. And I absolutely agree with your arguments about he's trying to express his personal philosophy of the martial arts there by demonstrating adaptation, by demonstrating originality and flexibility, by being non-traditional, by saying like, well, rather than wearing some sort of like traditional kung fu garb or martial arts garb, I'm going to grab this tracksuit, something like very different, very modern, very visually striking. That's the legacy that I would hope would be preserved, but is taken over by people that are like, well, yeah, we don't really see or care about his vision. We should just turn him into the thing that the tabloids said he was, regardless of its relationship to the truth. And we should, almost like satirize in a way, like create a parody of who this person was. In an attempt to quote unquote preserve his legacy, and to literally grave rob again, to display his corpse on camera in the context of a film, I just think it's again a despoiling of a brilliant artist's legacy, and that everything people love about that film solely rests on Bruce's genius, and that everything that's bad about it rests on Robert Klaus and Golden Harvest and Warner Brothers. And for that reason, I can't defend it as a good film, because it does tarnish a great person's legacy.
Thank you, Mr. Pruitt. Mr. Haslar, please present your closing argument.
It was recently announced that AI will be used to make a new Val Kilmer film, ghoulishly called As Deep as the Grave. Footage that Val never filmed, never wanted people to see, but blessed by the Kilmer estate to use his likeness, that will pioneer a new era of AI actor-exploitation films because of our inability to move on. I don't know about you, but in this world, I find myself constantly craving what is real. There is such a disappointment when I hover over something to come to realize, oh, that's AI, or the disconnect we allow ourselves to feel over things that are real, but can't be bothered to actually look into it. Some may criticize Game of Death for the choices it made, but what may lie ahead is what will really be bad, not Game of Death. Game of Death gave us a chance to more meaningfully say goodbye to one of cinema's greatest presences in a world where it seems so inconceivable that someone so strong could no longer be here. While I'm sure Bruce himself would have would have some amount of issues with how the film turned out, I think his complaints would be more along the lines of him not being able to finish the film itself, or himself, as it would be impossible to finish any other way without him being there. And so, Game of Death adopts the very philosophy of Jeet Kune Do that Bruce Lee taught. It becomes like water, and it adapts. As he put it, you put water in a cup, it becomes a cup. You put water in a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put water in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now, water can flow or it can crash. But be water, my friend, which is what Game of Death does. Instead of forcing itself into narrow, rigid rules of trying to complete the pagoda challenge he had in mind, it instead adapts and flows, yet utilizes the footage he had to a climax to crash with a force. Be water, jurors. Don't hold yourself to the rigid forms of what may be a good movie or a bad movie, but appreciate the flow. Be water.
Thank you both. Members of the jury, Mr. Maynard Bangs, Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, and Mr. Ryan Luis Rodriguez. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
Did I hear Bruce Lee's brother's name was Robert? I thought it was Broco.
All right. Well, I am the foreman. This was a really interesting case. There's quite a back and forth here, right? Ben would take the lead, but then Matt would come in and block the kick and take him down. Real parallel here to like Kareem and Bruce. So what are you feeling, Schlenzo?
Well, I love all the table setting and the context that we get for this movie, because this is like a special movie. I would definitely say I do think everyone should watch this, because this is kind of singular. You're not going to get another movie that's made quite like this for all the reasons that were outlined by both the prosecution and defense. So I'm really happy we got to hear about everything around the movie, because that's what makes it interesting. The movie itself, though, when if you had to watch it in a vacuum without all that context, very boring. Very boring. I appreciate the fact that the pagoda fights at the end are pretty cool, because Bruce Lee is just very good. The physicality of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is pretty excellent as well. But even I was not particularly impressed with those fights. I guess I was just like, it's like I don't know. Maybe I'm just not as big a Bruce Lee fan as some people in the courtroom. And really, what it comes down to me is like, did this respect Bruce Lee's legacy or disrespect it? And I think depending on how you view that question is how you'll come down on this movie. And I think both lawyers made some really good arguments that we'll really have to consider, because I think what Ben said is right. I think Bruce Lee wouldn't be disrespected per se, in so much as he would have wanted to have finished the movie, and I think he would have wanted people to see the footage. I don't think, based on everything Matt was saying, that this is the movie that he would have wanted it to happen this way. And it does sound like the director had a bit of an axe to grind, that he did want to try to squeeze some blood from the stone, and
that he's secretly Santa.
But yeah, he's secretly Santa. And it actually was funny though, when I was watching the fights, and I was like, I know Bruce Lee's famous for making these noises, but man, this is really getting annoying. And then to find out they didn't even use real Bruce Lee noises, I was like, okay, that actually makes a lot of sense and explains why it was really grating on me.
That was why I had to interrupt, because
yes,
I'm at the disadvantage where this is the first Bruce Lee movie I've ever seen, actually. So I'm one of those people that Matt talked about, and he's like, I really hope someone didn't watch this and decide they kind of don't like Bruce Lee. And that was kind of what happened. I'd be like, okay, Bruce Lee's all right, but he's not that hot shit. Like Kareem could have taken him. Kareem slammed him down into that thing. Kareem should have had him. So it is interesting to know that. But also, I was at that disadvantage of, I didn't always know when it wasn't Bruce Lee. They could have definitely fooled me when someone's head was just turned. I might have thought, well, maybe they had half this fight, and that's not being in the advantage of being in a vacuum, right? Like, completely in a vacuum. If you don't know this guy even dies, then you don't know it. This is one of those cases where we have to kind of consider the context of the movie
which is why both lawyers brought it up.
Scope.
I mean, and, you can't, definitely towards the end, and I think both lawyers admitted, they start giving up the ghost on the body doubles. It becomes very obvious towards the end. But I do appreciate the level of there is a level of care to kind of establish it at the beginning, where it's not very easy to tell. Like some of the tricks they do, I would have just not taken those shots, to be honest with you. Probably would have been the smarter thing to do, but towards the end, like when he's in that full Nelson, like that's very obviously not Bruce Lee, right? At least I don't think it is it? I don't know. It didn't look like him, but
I was watching it at a drive-in, so it was very blurry. Ryan?
Ryan, what do you think?
Well, I'll just repeat my Letterboxd review, and it is 3 words, simply: cinematic grave robbing.
Ooh.
That's what this is. This is ghoulish. This movie is in poor taste. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. The double wearing the oversized clunky sunglasses, no attempt to replicate his voice, the fake beard. Come on, are we going to just ignore the fucking fake beard? I mean,
Well,
the one thing that made me want to do was go watch Gymkhana again, because that's a much better movie. And then, then you have the great opening credits, and you have John Barry's score, John Barry being the 007 composer. But then at the end, they play shots of him straight up murdering people, and it's a sappy end credits theme. Like it was a love story this whole time. Fuck this movie. Oh my God. I hate this movie so much.
All right.
Well, so for me, the defense mentioned he was kind of impressed with the editing. Knowing kind of what they had to work with, I'm a little impressed with the editing, but like no more than I am with, say, Power Rangers, and the way that they're able to weave in the white kids with the Japanese footage of Super Sentai. So it's definitely possible to do. I had to decide whether I go optimistic or, as Matt had said, cynical, and I usually do fall cynical. So coming right out of this movie in the vacuum, I mean, I thought the final fight scenes were really hyped. I really did enjoy them. I actually enjoyed some of the earlier fight scenes too. I think with Wall, whoever he was fighting, I thought he still just did a good job because he threw a lot of great punches. But I did really hate the war cries, and to understand that it's not even him doing it, so of course they don't make sense.
Yeah, and they didn't have to do this. See, I think that was another interesting thing that Matt kept bringing up is, like, in theory, there were no limitations. They had access to everything they needed, and they still made these, frankly, baffling decisions and baffling choices that they simply didn't have to make. I mean, it's not like there was a time crunch. It was 5 years after he was dead. You know what I mean? So, yeah, this is just such an interesting case, because the context just really does a lot for, because sometimes we say that in this court, we're like, well, if you put yourself in that time period when you watch it, or we go the other way and say, well, if we watch it with today's lens. And I think if you put yourself in what would be modern to them, that context, if you put yourself in 78, I think it's very lacking. And especially if you put it in context today, it's very lacking. And I appreciate where Ben's coming from with, like, the AI stuff's going to be worse, but like this kind of opened the door for that. It's like, who would have guessed Fred Astaire dancing with a vacuum was going to lead to Val Kilmer being a robot, but here we are. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to lock in. I think Ben did a good job. I think there is an argument to be made for this movie, and Ben made it. I think Matt just came with more receipts and has had really good context. So I'm going guilty on this one.
Ryan, I know you're going to shock us.
Big respect to Ben. This movie blows. I loved his passion. I know that he believes in what he's saying because he's a smart guy. But unfortunately, this is going to be a guilty for me.
All right. Now, so it doesn't quite matter what I say. And
I think
I normally would kind of cast the not guilty, because I came out of it not bad until I heard everything Matt said, because Matt knew a lot about Bruce Lee.
He did.
He really info dumped on us. I was like, holy crap. And he knew everything about this. And to know that they actually had way more footage that they could have given us, and instead they padded out like an hour and 40 minutes of that dull stuff. This should have been double as much Bruce Lee fighting. It should have basically been close to the raw footage without very much You know, it sounds like it should have been what the later projects were. So it sounds like what I actually wanted this to be does exist, and I should go seek those out, and that this is a crappy version that should be left forever. So I am going to make it unanimous, and I am also going to go guilty.
Oh my God.
So let's get out there and tell that very handsome judge.
Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of The People versus Game of Death, 1978, we find the defendant guilty of being a bad movie.
Everyone's spinning nunchucks and throwing ninja stars. This is wonderful.
The verdict is so shut up. God damn it. The verdict is so rendered. Game of Death is sentenced to having its funeral included in a film with all notions of decency and ethics not to be considered. Court is adjourned.
Hiya! This is Guy Handsomely, the best martial arts expert this side of the Hudson. And I'm here to interview everyone after this trial here. So Matt Pruitt, get over here. I'm going to give you a karate kick. Hiya! What did you think of this verdict?
I think the jury rendered the correct decision, and I think Bruce Lee would be happy with that. And I think fans like myself, who think that Bruce deserves a bit more, would be very happy with this verdict as well. I honestly think, you know, I study a lot of different subjects. I'm a pretty well-read person, and I don't think it would be hyperbole for me to say that I think Bruce Lee is probably the most misunderstood and misrepresented figure in pop culture, at least in the 20th century, but if not, you know, in recent memory of the last however many centuries, maybe, who's been more mythologized, misrepresented, misunderstood. And I think Game of Death plays a significant role in that. So I'm glad that the jury was able to see through that and demystify that a bit.
Well, wait till they get a load of me. Hip toss! All right. Big Ben Haslar, get over here. I'm going to show you how to get out of a chokehold here while doing an interview. I'm just going to put you... There we go. How do you feel about today's verdict?
You know, I'm not mad at it. Matt Pruitt did info dump on us, but I do think that this was like a discussion kind of worth having, especially for an audience that may not be completely familiar with Bruce Lee and his legacy, which is incredible. You should watch Enter the Dragon. You should watch a few more of his films. And this is just like such a weird little mystery that's like sort of at the capstone of it. So I'm glad we had to talk about it. But yeah, no, Matt, you know your stuff. It was pleasure sparring with you.
Sparring, you say? All right, put up your dukes. Ow, my wrist. Okay, we're going to have to reschedule. Let's go back to the studio for post-trial analysis.
Became a real nerd there.
Well, he is a martial arts expert, not necessarily a practitioner. I don't know.
He also could have been Guy Mansomely.
What did I say? I couldn't even remember my name.
You said handsomely.
Handsomely. Oh, well.
And Ben spoke very well for being choked throughout that entire interview.
Well, I don't think
I always do. I'm being choked like every day of my life.
Jeez, Ben. Wow, though.
I'm like Bart Simpson. Homer Simpson's like, my dad's always on me.
I tell you what, though, great case. Matt, you clearly know a lot about Bruce Lee. Like, that was what made this case good, is that it was the context around the movie. We talked about the coolest stuff about it. So this is very well
I watched like 4 documentaries and I was still underprepared.
It's crazy, man. Like, you guys were kind enough to have me on to talk about the Sasquatch phenomenon, which probably couldn't be a stranger like juxtaposition to this. But I will say, if there's any subject I've studied for longer and more in depth than even that, it's the life and times of Bruce Lee. Like, I've just been a super fan since I was 12.
Awesome.
I literally have read every book and seen every document, and there's a gazillion of them. And, you know, they're not all great. As if you watched 4 documentaries, like maybe 3.5 of them were bad, just depending on which ones you watch.
My recommendation is one of them. You'll have to tell me.
Yeah. I mean, and there's shades of truth in a lot of them. I mean, really, to get a whole picture, that's the frustrating thing is there's just not a really complete record in one place. Like, there are some really good documentaries that just have major omissions that I think are really just like time constraints, which is funny to think about. You know, someone who only lived for 32 years, but accomplished a lot, and a lot of really interesting things happened that shaped that story. You think, oh, you could tell that person's story in an 1.5 hour long documentary, but there's always these big omissions. So usually it's like, well, if you read these 2 or 3 books and watch these like 4 or 5 documentaries, you probably get a pretty thorough picture. But I don't know that anyone's ever put it all together in one place, other than, Matthew Pauly wrote a biography that came out a few years ago called Bruce Lee: A Life, and that's the most complete one. But it came out
Well, you're
right
some kind of writer, right? maybe that could be you.
I think it sounds to me like the Bruce Lee estate, are very difficult to do anything with or about. I think they're pretty litigious. I'm kind of surprised.
Yet they let this movie happen. That's funny.
Well,
Maybe
at that
that's
time,
why they're litigious.
well, it is, because at that time his estate hadn't even been fully probated yet. The estate wasn't settled until 1980. So there were still legal battles and things of that nature going on during that time. So I don't think Linda Lee had any real input or influence, even from a legal standpoint, any ink in her pen to do anything about it at that point. But I'm sure that played a role into clamping down the sort of presentation and the preservation of the image and the legacy in the aftermath of that, for sure.
And how creepy is it that he's killed by a fake gun on a movie set, and then that's how his son dies? I mean, that gave me chills. I was like, what the hell? Like, come on.
It's utterly bizarre.
They planned it that way.
Oh, I don't know. Don't besmirch Michael Massey. He didn't know what he was doing.
That is the funny thing.
That wasn't his fault, probably.
Yeah, those stories totally lend themselves to that mythology, being mythologized.
Good point.
And that's what's so interesting about the rumor mill about Bruce Lee, is that, like I said in the discussion, a lot of it was happening during his lifetime. These stories about like, oh, Bruce Lee was jumped by 25 ninjas and he defeated them all and only sustained a sprained ankle, and people would believe that. And that was happening while he was alive. And then after he died, of course, the myths got bigger and larger. And so it's like, the juxtaposition, because Chuck Norris trained with him and they were friends, and he put Chuck in a film, and people always want to A/B, sort of compare the two. And I'm like, look, man, like Chuck's kind of a meme, it's that whole, when Chuck jumps in water, he doesn't get wet. The water gets Chuck Norris. You know what I mean? Whereas like Bruce Lee's the kind of person that people believe insane things about, and he's almost like a deity to some people. And there are statues of him all over the world. And so they both occupy this place in pop culture, but they're very, like, Chuck's kind of a joke, and, God rest his soul, rest in peace, Chuck. But their legacies are very, very different, or at least their public images. And so it is unfortunate that like 99% of the discussions I have about Bruce Lee is trying to tell people like, actually, no, that story's not true. The truth is really more interesting, but, it'll be anything from, oh, I heard he could do, 500 one-armed pull-ups at once. Like, no, I kind of don't think that's true, man.
That would be hard.
Or, like, because he would do these demonstrations, do like 2-finger push-ups. Oh, I heard he could do 1,500 of those in a row. Like, I kind of doubt that, But it's amazing that people believe those things. And so when you have this strange sort of unexplained sudden death that lends itself to all these things, and then the way that Brandon died years later, literally 20 years later, people start to associate those things. But the fact that happens in a scene in Game of Death in 1978 is a very bizarre coincidence.
Yeah, it's just nuts.
And people don't want to look at their heroes as mortal, which is a big faction in the constant conspiracy theories revolving around Brandon and Bruce Lee.
Yes.
It's like Elvis. Oh, he didn't really die. No, that's a fake wax body in Graceland. Like, no, Elvis died on the toilet.
Yeah, that's the only thing
you're
I know.
You're going to have to accept it.
I think it was an episode of some History Channel show, but it was all just about the death of Bruce Lee, and I think some of them.
Yeah, I think it was a History's Mysteries they talked about.
Yes, I think it was a History's Mysteries,
and they just did another one.
I believe according to ancient astronauts.
No, man, we're gonna pivot.
Okay.
We're gonna pivot.
All right, Matt. Okay, we gotta change the subject. What has been keeping you busy since the last time you've been here? What have you been up to?
I'm still, producing, editing, co-hosting Bigfoot and Beyond, and then our bonus show cleverly titled Beyond Bigfoot and Beyond. So that's kind of the full-time gig. I am working on another book, but that's sort of slow going because I've been out in the field as much as I can be this year. This is the sort of season, like usually February, March through, October, I try to be out in the field as much as possible. I've done a few speaking events here and there, and so I've got one coming up this weekend, and then again, not one until September. So I'll have plenty of field time and hopefully get these other projects done. But that's been, same old Bigfoot wise. That stuff keeps me pretty
I haven't
busy.
found him yet, but we're still looking.
Close. So Matt, I wanted to ask you, because some of the biggest Bigfoot news is this documentary that came out, Capturing Bigfoot, which is saying they are proving that the Patterson Gimlin footage is fraudulent. Now, I know a lot of people haven't seen it. I've heard people talking about it, and apparently the film they found had never been developed, and they do say it's Bob Gimlin chasing a guy in a suit, but they say it looks smaller than the Patty suit. So what are we supposed to make of this? I know on your podcast you guys said you didn't want to speculate, but this is my podcast, so please speculate away.
Yeah, well, the reason that we had to sort of throw that caveat out there is because people were, and still are, losing their minds about it. If you could imagine, a similar claim being made in like a religious context, the way that different like factions and opposing, segments of either religious practitioners or even like two different opposed religions would be at war over just a claim, because we haven't even seen the found footage yet. So that's why we were like, well, hey, we're not going to add to this because, to make a long story short, we can take as much time as you want, but we've been aware of this found footage for over a year now, because when it was first, it had been developed apparently, but it needed to be digitized. And so this filmmaker had it digitized, and, he said his own words in some of the press that he's done. He did an interview for Wall Street Journal and one for the Hollywood Reporter and one for People Magazine, and then a couple of like YouTube interviews. He said, we looked at this for 9 months before we knew what it might be, which tells me immediately like, well, it can't look that much like the Patterson film if it took 9 months to make that connection. And in his words, he says, the subject is smaller, skinnier. It looks like potentially a different color/texture, and that the head and the face look markedly different. And so their sort of interpretation is that it's an earlier iteration of this suit and either a test run or a rehearsal. And then after reviewing the footage, maybe modifications were made that result in what you see on the film. And so, based on what that filmmaker said, it's like, okay, well, he's pointing out the marked differences. And then the experts that were shown the footage for the documentary, like Jeff Meldrum, Larry Lund, Bill Munns, said, it looks markedly different. Unfortunately, we lost Dr. Meldrum last year. He passed away.
R.I.P. Yeah.
But there was one individual who did attend a screening in Austin, because it was only screened at South by Southwest, and then the fervor within the Bigfoot community went so crazy. They actually pulled it from other screenings because they're worried about piracy. Because they think
they should be. I want to see this thing any way I can.
Exactly. And so I think it's a valid concern that someone's going to come in with an iPhone. We only really want to see like the 40 seconds of footage more than anything, but
Redux.
Exactly.
All over again.
And so the gentleman who went to the screening, he thinks like, oh, it looks just like the Patterson subject. So you have these two takes between someone like, the casual observer who saw it, and then the words of the filmmaker and the other people. So it's like, I don't really know what to think, but my prediction would be that you're going to have, I think it will just reinforce people's entrenched positions in terms of, if you think it's a hoax or likely a hoax, then this is just going to confirm that. And I think the diehard believers, if there's any visible difference whatsoever, that's what they'll lean on to say that is not the same subject. It's an attempt to replicate it, or it's this, that, or the other. They'll create some sort of backstory. That's already happening.
Oh, I've got a few backstories, because let's face it, if it's a smaller guy, then it's not Bob Hieronymus in the suit. And apparently that's one of the things the documentary is saying, is that it was Bob Hieronymus in the Patty footage. So who's the other guy now? So now there's another Confederate that's never come up before?
The filmmakers are trying to make the argument that it's Al Diatley in the rehearsal footage. Al Diatley was Roger's brother-in-law, and Al was very connected to all this. Al funded Roger's field expeditions, and he helped four-wall. He basically ran the four-walling that happened. After the Patterson film was obtained, he did a sort of a handshake deal with the BBC, gave them some of the footage that he had already obtained, interviewing witnesses and sort of B-roll around the Northwest. And then the BBC put together this documentary. It's on YouTube now. It's the very first Sasquatch documentary. It came out in 1968, called Bigfoot, America's Abominable Snowman. And so they couldn't broadcast it. That was their agreement with the BBC, is that we'll broadcast it. You guys can show it in theaters, but you can't broadcast it on American television. So Al Diatley and Patterson took it on tour. They would rent theaters, four-walling essentially. Yeah. And so the claim is that it's Al Diatley in that suit. And, from the bits and pieces of hearing people who've seen the documentary, they're saying that there are some cousins of Patterson, or of the Patterson family, who used to work for Al. And when they saw the rehearsal footage, they said something like, oh, that kind of walks like Big Al did. But you never see it take on or take off the mask. So I'm like, well, you might as well say it's like Chuck Norris or Richard Nixon in the suit, like, if you don't know who's in it. So I don't think they're saying like definitively that's the case. They're just saying like, well, we believe it's Al because it's somehow, I think the filmmaker's words were like, it's definitely a different human in the suit because its proportions are so different. It's smaller and skinnier, were his words.
Yeah,
so,
they're not saying it can't be that Patty can't even be a guy in a suit, but like you said,
Certainly.
like it would have to be literally the same suit and him taking off the mask or something. I mean, the circumstances behind how they got the Patty footage. I mean, I'm not saying this for your benefit. You obviously already know, but like he like fell off the horse, like he pushed the release trigger like 3 times. I mean, it's like that's something you do if you're just making it up, but maybe he did. Maybe he was just that clever. I don't know.
Hey, there's nothing to say that they weren't out there to film some fake Bigfoot footage and then Bigfoot showed up. Talk about convenient.
That would be the coolest thing ever.
Right.
I mean, they were there because there were Bigfoot sightings there too. I mean, like, I don't know.
Guys, it'd be a lot easier to get footage of real Bigfoot than to keep making these goddamn suits. I agree with that there, Al. I'm tired of going in the suit again.
If you look at the obvious hoaxers, like Cripplefoot, no one talks about that anymore. The footage the guy got of that, I mean, it looks like a guy in a sweater, for crying out loud. Patty's a completely different class. So when people say, like, oh, it looks like a cheap suit, it's like, okay, it doesn't look like a cheap suit. If it's a suit, it looks like a really good one, okay?
Yeah,
but
well, I've always said
issues.
on all these, even if that footage is made up, even if a whole bunch of the footage is made up, only one of those sightings needs to be real.
Exactly. There's still a lot of good evidence that you can read in Matt Pruitt's fantastic book, The Phenomenal Sasquatch. So
and
make sure you pick that up.
And the song Call Me Al.
That's another one. Anyway, so we always ask for recommendations from our guests for movies that you think people should see. So Matt, what is a movie you think people should see?
Well, I would definitely say, given the context of this discussion, go watch Enter the Dragon. I mean, it's the quintessential martial arts movie. That's what changed the landscape of martial arts cinema, or just combat on camera forever. And I love showing those scenes to people who haven't seen it, and like juxtaposing it against something modern, like, again, if it's more modern fight scenes in a Bourne style movie, and showing someone like, hey, watch this fight scene. Count how many cuts there are. Look how tight the camera is, where you're seeing,
see how much it moves.
Yeah, exactly. Where you're seeing Matt Damon from like, the shoulder to the belt line, as a arm jumps. And it's like, go watch those Bruce Lee films. Like, they don't cut away. You see him from head to toe. Like, he's really doing all that stuff, and at this like hyper fast speed, and just really amazing. And to think like all the cheating that's done to make action look cool today, which, is still enjoyable, but definitely you got to go to the source and see like, oh, this is where it all sort of came from, because that was the culmination of his work at that time. And it was the birth of an entire genre, and changed the face of action cinema forever. And so I would say, go watch Enter the Dragon.
I wish that Shaky Cam was on its way out, but it looks like it's just getting bolstered.
I haven't even seen any, like, because I'm such a diehard Bruce Lee fan, but I'm not like a big martial arts fan. So it's like, I don't know a whole lot of that world. I don't watch a whole lot of those movies. Like,
the Raid movies are really good.
I just think Bruce Lee, like, as a person, because he's sort of a rock star. I mean, he's sort of like a John Lennon or a Paul McCartney. Like, he just really interesting life, changed the landscape, had a vision and stuck to it and followed his instincts, had a million reasons to quit over and over and over again, and never did, and became a global icon. And of course, the tragic element, becoming a global icon immediately after you pass away, because he died right before Enter the Dragon was released. So there's a lot of like mythological archetypal elements even to the true story, let alone all the mythology that's grown up around it. So it's just a fascinating guy, fascinating time and place, and especially the whole Hollywood era of his life, because that gets a bit underrepresented as far as I can tell. Like most people think it's like immigrant kid blows up in Hong Kong. It's like, no, he was like a rock star when he was a kid. He was
Wasn't he
the
born
biggest.
in San Francisco?
What's that?
Wasn't he born in San Francisco?
Yeah, he was. He was born in San Francisco. He was born at the Chinese hospital down on Jackson Street in Chinatown. I've been there. I had to go take a picture in front of it, of course, like nerdy Bruce Lee tourism. So he was a U.S. citizen, but to retain his citizenship, he had to come back. But his father was
your profile pic for this episode.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'll send it over. But yeah, his father was a Cantonese opera star, and they were on tour in America, and so he brought along his pregnant wife, and so Bruce was born here. But a lot of people don't realize, like, he was in 20 movies before he moved back to the States at 18. So he was in films literally as an infant and a toddler, and his first leading role was at the age of 6, and made 20 films as the lead by the time he was 18. And so it started off with this. He would always play like the orphan with a heart of gold, almost like a Oliver Twist kind of thing. They were very kind of slapstick comedies, almost like Macaulay Culkin Home Alone. And then when he was in his teens, they were more like romantic movies. They called them weepies, sort of like The Notebook kind of thing. So he was like this Hong Kong teen heartthrob. He was also the cha-cha champion in I think 58. So he taught dance lessons. He did martial arts, and then came back to the States to retain citizenship, but also because he was running into a lot of trouble with the law. And so his parents were like, hey man, you got to go make something of yourself, because you're just going to end up in jail. Because he was kind of a brat, like a snotty street fighting, but well-to-do sort of young movie star with a wealthy family. So it's not like this rags to riches story. It's like riches to rags to riches. But there's this period of time, like, when he's living in Hollywood after the Green Hornet is done, he's getting bit parts. He read for Hawaii 5-0. He was up for that. All these different shows that almost.
All right, Matt, I'll see Enter the Dragon. Okay, I'll see Enter the Dragon. All right.
Sorry, I get nerdy about Bruce Lee, but it's a fascinating story. You guys would, if you dig into it.
That's why we have you on, man.
Exactly. We love the info dump. Now we gotta let Ben info dump. Ben, what is your recommendation?
For my documentation this week, I'd like to point you towards one of the things I watched in preparation for this case. We'll see if Matt thinks it's one of the good ones. Enter the Clones of Bruce. For free on Tubi. Okay, maybe this isn't one of the good ones.
Here we go.
This documentary takes a look at the many phases of Bruceploitation genre that exploded across the world as people grappled with the sudden death of international superstar Bruce Lee, covering Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee, Dragon Lee, Bronson Lee, yes, a Charles Bronson Bruce Lee hybrid. Expect a Schlender recommendation on that next week. Black Bruce Lees, even female Bruce Lees. There is so much variability in this genre. I like how one of the people being interviewed kind of posit that the paths these films took kind of take like the paths we would take in the grieving process, from denial, like Fist of Fury 2, or one of the 3 Big Boss 2 films that were produced, through bargaining, like Bruce Lee Fights Back from the Grave, where Bruce is literally Jason Voorhees out of his coffin to do more fighting. Depression, like Clones of Bruce Lee, featuring multiple imitators coming together at once for a triple fix. These films run the gamut, genuinely trying to make sequels to pure and utter trash. It's all really interesting stuff, and such a testament to what a massive force Bruce was, that he could generate over 200 films of people just trying to tap into that essence after he was gone. And of course, learn about the lives of these actors going into these films and picking up the pieces left from the B-movie fame.
Mac, just quickly, is that a good one or a bad one?
Oh, it's a very fun documentary.
And
right now, if you want to, the 2 best documentaries, there's one for free on YouTube right now. It's called I Am Bruce Lee. It came out in like 2012. It's pretty good. There's some talking heads that are kind of irrelevant, but it's pretty good. But the very best one is ESPN's 30 for 30 documentary, Be Water. It's not the most complete one, but as a documentary film, it's beautiful.
Good.
Very well done.
Yeah, 30 for 30 is usually pretty solid.
Yeah, those
Yeah, they do good work.
The longer they are, the better they are.
Yes.
I love those short. Yeah, the best.
30 whole hours. Wow. Ryan, what is your recommendation?
It's probably not going to be a surprise that I, Ryan Luis Rodriguez, the Eeyore of Reels of Justice, am having a rough go of things, so I tend to binge television shows to feel some semblance of hope. And that happened when I discovered the inclusive and quietly political Cartoon Network series We Bare Bears, created by Daniel Chong, the director of Pixar's delightful Hoppers. It tells the sensitive and charming story of three brother bears: Grizz, he's a grizzly; Pan Pan, he's a panda; and Ice Bear, clearly he's an ice bear, and their adventures in and around the Bay Area, my home. But since we're not recommending shows, I decided to recommend 2020's We Bare Bears, the movie, also directed by Chong. In the movie, the bears become fugitives and decide to hightail it to a more friendly nation, Canada. It's on the low end of Cartoon Network's made-for-TV movies, but always endearing, always charming, and even emotional. I'm just sad to see them go. We Bare Bears, the movie, is currently streaming on Hulu.
I thought it was the Bear area, not the Bay Area.
Come on,
that was fun.
It's the Arctic, actually, is the bear area, is the Arctic. But what about We Baby Bears, Ryan? You can get.
I'm watching.
They have a movie
on season 2.
I don't think they have a movie yet.
No,
I hope
they
we
don't.
get more
They
We
do not.
Baby Bears. We could use some more.
They're still in season 3.
Now, I am actually genuinely excited for my recommendation. Billy Lowe's fiancée in this film was played by Colleen Camp, who we all love as Yvette the maid in Clue. But the year prior to Game of Death, Colleen would star in my recommendation today, 1977's Death Game, although it was actually filmed in 74 and heavily delayed. When two beautiful girls show up on his doorstep during a rainstorm, well-to-do businessman George has no idea they intend to play 2/3 of Marry, Fuck, Kill. Luckily for him, it's the good 2/3. Now, I only watched this movie to get directions on how to prevent this awful fate from ever befalling me or someone I care about. Though there are worse ways to die than being seduced and murdered by two beautiful women. Old age, for example. Colleen Camp does a tremendous job of being out of her gourd crazy, but the real show stealer is Sandra Locke as the more malevolent and cruel of the women. She apparently accepted the role as it was against type for her, but she absolutely tapped into something primal here as the femme fatale Jackson. Consider me a fan. Frequent John Cassavetes / Wes Anderson collaborator Seymour Cassel completes the triad as the lucky schmuck, hapless victim George, who manages to convincingly convey that he's having a bad time throughout. Acting! Thank you. Unfortunately, I found the ending to be a bit lame. However, after reading some of the other ideas they had in mind, I can live with the one they went with. This was remade in 2015 as Knock Knock, starring Keanu Reeves and Gulp, Ana de Armas, which I haven't seen yet, but it's now moved right up to the top of my list.
It's not great.
terrible.
It's not great.
Well, we're going to find out.
It's at the top of the list, guys. What do you want?
On the top of the list, guys. I doubt very highly it can compete with the camp, Ryan? The camp of the original. But I'm willing to try because it's Colleen Camp. Anyway, but I'm willing to try anything twice. 1977's Death Game is currently streaming on Plex, which is great if you want to binge a few TV shows during commercial breaks. Because it's Colleen Camp, and it's camp, and I figured you were the only guy who was going to get it, Ryan. Fine, whatever.
Schlender's
Bear area. Bear area sounded pretty good right now.
Well, fellas, I love a good flick about underground street fighting, so imagine my delight at the bouquet of options on Tube for this specific genre. So I am recommending 2026 Hands. A martial arts couple faces tragedy, forcing our leading lady to seek revenge and redemption. Redempge, if you will, in an illegal MMA tournament.
Ooh.
And don't worry, Billy Blanks is here for some reason too. But I have breaking news. It's not on Tubi anymore. It's streaming exclusively on a new service that I am absolutely giddy to promote and explore in more detail called All Black. It is exactly what you are thinking, and look forward to more All Black exclusive recommendations right after I watch Bronson Lee Champion, which is a real movie, and I Googled it while Ben was talking.
I told you.
I'm very excited to watch that. It actually is a mashup of Charlie Bronson and Bruce Lee. I'm very excited. All right, that's what I got. Maynard, take us home.
Pretty excellent, but I would have gone with Revemption.
How dare you? Why do we even bother? My dignity is no longer intact.
And with that, we are all at a show. But we want to thank our guest, Matt Pruitt, for joining us. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks for having me. It's so much fun to chat with you guys.
I almost called you a host because you're just such a natural. So,
Hey.
but we hope to have you back for. We already did Bruce Lee and we did Bigfoot, so we'll have to find out what your third info dump topic is on.
There's got to
we can
be
find
a
something.
martial arts Bigfoot movie, right? I mean,
Several.
yeah, we'll find it.
I bet we could probably get a cast of Kareem's foot off of Bruce Lee's chest from this movie.
It's all coming together.
There it is. But we're going to have Matt back, and we hope everyone else will join us as well as the reels of justice keep turning.
Count it.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.